I'm Deborah Greenspan. I'm Vice President for International Relations at Northwestern University. And I'm very excited to see you all here. I hope some of you had a chance to attend the Water Symposium yesterday. It was the 9th annual symposium on water in Israel, the Middle East, and Africa. And we had a wonderful gathering of incredible speakers from Africa, from Israel, from all over, and including Alon Tal, our speaker today. So he came for that meeting as well. So our speaker will be introduced by my colleague Eli Reges. Eli Reges is the Crown Visiting Professor for Israel Studies. And he's also the director of the Israel Innovation Project here at Northwestern. Eli is a professor of history, and he has been instrumental in organizing for 9 years now the annual symposium on water in the Middle East. He teaches a class on water innovation and technology in the Middle East. And he also takes a group of students on a global trek to Israel, when possible, to look at water and transboundary water issues. So Eli is one of Israel's leading experts on the Arab minority in Israel, Arab-Israeli relations, and Palestinian politics. And he has spent decades studying the complexities of the region, and he's working right now, I think, on a book on the Arab minority in Israel. So we are very excited that Eli has been here to bring us speakers like Alon Tal, who not only study issues from afar, but who live with these issues every day. So they're experts in many, many ways. So thank you, Eli, for your efforts, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and I'm taking a minute to look at you all and make sure that I see a almost full house. It wasn't easy to get a full house. We worked on this continuously, and I would like first to thank the staff that has been involved in organizing it all. IR staff, International Relations, Yanka, Jennifer, where are you here? And Louis, of course, in the back, and the IIP staff. Crystal from far away. Those who know Crystal, she just had her girl baby a week ago. She knew when to have the baby, avoiding all this mess. And Lauren, her replacement, and Lou, her replacement. So, thank you, Dvorah, for the introduction, warm introduction. It's my pleasure being here, and what I'll do is I'll introduce the speaker. We started a bit early so that we can have more time for Alon to speak and Q&A, because by 1 p.m. we have to vacate the place. This is a very popular hall. I hope you appreciate it. And there is a next event coming, so we have to get out of here. So, Professor Alon Tal, who's this is not the first visit of Alon to Northwestern. He has been here before. He has taken part in, I don't recall which symposium, but one of our previous symposia. And furthermore, based on what we had in the last 2 days, I have a strong feeling that this will not be his last visit to Northwestern, as we plan for next year some exciting events. So, Alon is not the typical speaker guest, in the sense that his career has been a balancing act between academia and public interest advocacy. You don't get too many of these around. He's an Israeli politician, an academic, and an environmentalist. This is his second show, as Devorah mentioned, this week, as he participated in our international symposium on water insecurity organized by IIP, my program, and the Water Center, the Center for Water Research at Northwestern. A word about his public record. He was a member of the 24th Knesset between 2021 and 22, representing Blue and White party, political party. And, it's very difficult to prophesize, particularly with regard to the future, as they say. But I have a feeling that he might be returning to the Knesset. He has served as deputy chair of Keren Kayemet L'Israel, Jewish National Fund, where for many years he oversaw national forestry policy in Israel. I don't know whether to say it or not, perhaps more importantly, he's a leading Israeli environmentalist, founder of many NGOs, and during his parliamentary service, he headed the House Subcommittee for Environment, Climate, and Health. Academically, his other hat, Alon's career is most impressive. He's a member of Tel Aviv University faculty. He chaired the Department of Public Policy for many years, and currently he's a visiting professor, returning visiting professor at Stanford, where he's with the business school and sustainability. He's a proficient writer, 8 authored books and numerous, I think you exceeded the 120, 130, peer-reviewed articles. Now, in academic language, this is good. In his talk today, and we are fortunate to have him as the second part of his visit to Northwestern, he will briefly address several questions. First, consider the background of the military conflicts in the region. I hope he will deal with the question of how the present war in Gaza is changing perceptions and the shift in the geopolitical dynamics of the Middle East. Not simple questions. Discuss the prospects for transforming the present tragedy to open a new page in the relations between these historic salaries, and whether common environmental challenges offer an important pathway towards forward and an opportunity for reframing the conflict and pursuing a more harmonious future in the region. So, the order of the day, as I said, we need to finish by 1. I'll call Alon to come over. He will speak for about 35 minutes, 35, 40 minutes. And then we'll open it for Q&A. Some of you had already sent us some questions, which I'll integrate into the discussion of the Q&A. So without further ado, Alon, b'vakasha.
Thank you so much, Eli, for having me, and Devorah for a new friend in the Chicago area. And thank you all for coming. Scott, the JNF team. I think I'll move over to this. Can you hear me? Is this clear? If there's a control, I'll just speak louder. Okay, so first of all, it would take about a week to cover all the topics that Eli said. So I will promise you this. I can't promise I'll cover everything, but I do hope to give you an optimistic perspective, even though the objective reality may suggest otherwise. You know, environmentalists have, by their very nature, it's almost the DNA, you have to be born an optimist because the data usually are so discouraging. There's no reason to get up in the morning. And I'm looking at the present situation and I see some opportunities, which I hope I will point out in the end. But I'd like to start by sharing sort of how I got into the whole dynamic and ecosystem of the region and looking at our Arab neighbors and getting to know them. It really started in 1994. This was at the very, very incipient stages of the peace process. And at that time, there was a conference that was sponsored for all the environmental organizations, the NGOs in the Arab world in Sfax, Tunisia. Sfax is the second largest city in Tunisia. And at the time, the foreign ministry thought it would be a really neat thing to have an Israeli delegation go. And they were looking for somebody. I was director of an environmental organization at the time. We were suing polluters wherever we could find them and having a good time doing that. And I thought it was a great thing to go out and meet colleagues in Tunisia. The Tunisian government, less so. They were somewhat unenthusiastic then, and even today, they don't really have diplomatic relations with Israel. But the conference was being sponsored by an organization which you may have heard of, the old timers. I kind of think it's moved off the stage, called USAID. But it did some great things, okay? And the USAID project manager was a guy named Avram Ben David. And he said he saw this as his opportunity to make a contribution. So he said to the people in Tunisia, either you accept this Israeli delegation that Tal is going to chair, or we're going to pull the plug on the funding. So very quietly, they let us in, and we came. And it was a fascinating thing. It was my first encounter with Arabs in general from outside of Israel, and certainly Arab environmentalists. After initially awkward moments, because they really didn't know what to make of us. All they'd heard of Israeli had what they heard on the news, which is usually a lot of disinformation and negative propaganda, but they're awfully curious. And I remember I made a lecture there, but at the time we had just finished a campaign to abate the pollution coming from the cow sheds in the Golan Heights, where the discharges were coming to the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee, increasing the nutrients there. And I remember in the Q&A, they couldn't get their heads around the fact that here were organizations ostensibly like theirs that were suing the government, trying to lobby in the Knesset, having demonstrations against the government, because, quite frankly, of the 15 countries represented, not one of them was a democracy. And depending on how you define Tunisia, maybe a flawed democracy, they still aren't. And this was very, very curious. It was really a good gathering. And I know my takeaway when I came there was the sense that, wow, look at all these people that have very similar concerns that I do. But when I talked to them, I realized there was not a single institution in any of their countries that taught anything that was similar to what I considered to be environmental policy, environmental science. I just finished my doctorate. And so I came back to Israel, and a couple years later, my kibbutz at the time, Kibbutz Keturah, summoned me and said, you need to come back here and do something to help the economy here. I wanted to set up a horseback riding ranch. They said, no, that's not. Do something that's practical. So I said, okay, let's create a regional environmental institute and bring Palestinians and Jordanians and Egyptians. They said, oh, that's a good idea. That's practical. So we did it, and astonishingly, Arab students came. This was opened our doors at the Arava Institute in 1996. And it was really extraordinary how the students from Israel and the students from the region sort of left their politics at the door and discovered that they all shared a lot of common values. They all, wanted to breathe air that was clean. They loved nature. They all wanted to have more peace in the region. And, over the course of the year, there was this transformation as the Arab students were adopted by kibbutz families and acted in the Purim play and helped make the kitchen kosher at Passover. And we all had to readjust our stereotypes, and it was wonderful. And since that time, for 30 years, I have been in the space of environmental cooperation. In fact, just this year, we published an article with colleagues from Quds University about recommended concentrations of medical residuals in effluents. Anyway, the kind of things that we talk about, environmentalists. So this is the thing. I tell you all this because I want you to understand what a shock October 7th was for me, because I have been working with Palestinians for many, many years. And it didn't take long for me to realize that just like the Israeli army was surprised, so were the so-called peace camp in Israel, that we had been complacent, maybe Pollyannic. And although, Hamas has been perfectly clear about its intentions, we all knew that their charter, which had been reissued in 2017 with its famous line about, come here, Abdallah, the tree in the rock calls, there's a Jew behind here, come and kill him. That's in their actual charter. So, but we all assumed, well, that's just rhetoric to play off to the clergy. Basically, once they have the responsibilities of running a country, and that's basically what Gaza was at the time, they'll start fixing potholes and running school systems, and they'll become more pragmatic. How wrong we were. And Israel punched back. And I can't think of a war that was more morally justified. And it's been at a terrible place, both for the Israeli soldiers, the hundreds of Israeli soldiers who've died, and the tens of thousands of Gazans. But we really felt like we had no choice, and we didn't have a real choice. Now, when I think about those early days of the war, I remember an article written by Yuval Noah Harari, our sort of savant anthropologist who's written 4 bestsellers. You may have heard of Sapiens, whatever, but he wrote an op-ed in the New York Times. And he said this: we are suffering in Israel. We are traumatized. We don't have the emotional bandwidth to be proactive and move ourselves forward. We need a responsible adult to help us and our neighbors and the Palestinians move forward because we're at war. And to a large extent, I think Joe Biden played that role as a responsible adult with moderate success. I say moderate because he was up against something which I think it was unexpected. It was unprecedented. That was an extreme right-wing government, and a government in which the prime minister saw his political future hanging in the balance and was ultimately captive to somewhat messianic, very, very extreme politicians. And for a few months in the war, our party joined an emergency government because we felt that the country is at war and that was the right thing to do. But very soon, we've had much experience with the disingenuous chicanery of the prime minister, and we pulled out. And since that time, he's been left there in that situation. Now, the truth of the matter is that our situation since that time has, I think we all know the history, and I'm not going to go through with the ups and downs of the war. I can say this, that when you live in a tough neighborhood, deterrence is extremely important as a fundamental core strategy for survival. And Israeli deterrence with regards to our many adversaries, the so-called 7 fronts that we fight, was at a low point on October 7th or October 8th. And I think to some extent, if we look at the favorable outcomes that happened in Hezbollah and taking them out in Lebanon, with Syrians happening, Iran to some extent, I think deterrence has to a large extent been restored. And that's a very, very important thing. If we're ever going to think about long-term sustainable peace in the region, there has to be some of that as well. But when I looked at what's happening now, I think the coming week's going to be very important. This past weekend in the Israeli press, there was report of a new Israeli military initiative, which they are waiting for Trump's Middle East visit to end before they unleash it. It's called Gideon's Chariot, okay? And it is, at least the PowerPoint that was leaked to the press in Israel, 6 points to it. Doesn't sound particularly original. It's going to start off by massive bombings, and then there's going to be a call on all the Palestinians in Gaza to move into a narrow strip near the coast, near the Egyptian border. There'll be very tough roadblocks there where they're going to try to filter out as many Hamas fighters as they can, and anybody left there they will try to take out. That's the 4th point. The 5th point then would be is that Israel will hold on to those lands, and the Palestinians will have the opportunity to decide if they want to go to Egypt and try to do better there or stay in this small strip. I think in making this kind of a proposal, the prime minister and the Israeli government are making a pretty big gamble. There's a lot of assumptions behind there, which I'm not sure are going to be validated. Let's start with the notion that I'm not sure that President Trump, after he just got a wonderful $400 million gift from the Qataris, is going to be amenable to Israel pummeling the Gaza Strip once again. I'm not sure that Egypt, which has time and again made the point that they are not going to be a place where Palestinian refugees are allowed to enter, if they're going to be up for it, Israel's other allies, or they're at least the countries with whom they have diplomatic relations, I'm not sure they're going to be up for it. I'm not sure that the assumption that Hamas is going to crumble and fall is a valid one. We've all seen that Hamas has this unbelievable ability. It's to like grass. You cut it and then it comes up very, very quickly, and 20,000 new fighters emerged almost overnight there. So I'm not sure they're going to get the memo. And then there's the question about the Israeli public itself. There's 60,000 draft orders which have been prepared and sent out for this massive campaign. But we all know, anybody who lives in Israel, because it's a people's army, that the response rate is going to be extremely low. First of all, people, after spending 150 and 200 days in reserve duty, simply have no choice. a friend of mine's son worked for an American company. He lost his job. He has another job. He cannot miss more days of work. And then there's also the question about the true intentions of the government. Is this really a war which is essential? We've already conquered the Jabalia refugee camp 5 times. The 6th time will really make a difference? Or maybe this is another round which is intended to keep the prime minister in power because his political allies are demanding it. So I'm not sure the Israeli public is going to accept that, or the people who are supposed to come out and fight that war. And even more important, I'm not sure Israel is going to be the same country ethically, in terms of our status in the world, if that is the kind of real strategy we've had. So that's sort of the picture as it comes up to literally this weekend or this morning. This was a talk I had to make in real time because things are changing so dynamically. And I promised you an optimistic talk. So why am I optimistic that actually we might come out of the war with Gaza with a better reality? A reality which we might want to look our kids in the eyes and say, yes, this is a country you can live in and have a good life. So there are 5 things that I want to point out to you that I think have essentially changed, or that give us an opportunity that maybe didn't exist there in the past. And it's not just that Hamas's capabilities and its capacity has been significantly diminished and they're no longer a threat. There's 5 things that I'd like to do. But before I do that, I forgot to mention an important point. I had a problem with the Gideon's chariot I wanted to mention because, you know, Gideon, if you read the book of Judges, he didn't have chariots. So already there's an inaccuracy. But it's not only that. Gideon's whole point was that he started with 32,000 fighters, and the Almighty said, no, go to 20,000. We have the rabbi here, correct me. And then it went to 300 with that almost, famous story where they picked the 300 fighters by those who had the integrity and the self-control to bend down and drink with their hands. And he went with 300 fighters. It wasn't 60,000, okay? It was a small, intelligent, clever attack. Anyway, but that's not what we're planning. But I want to talk, I just forgot and put that in, so I wanted to mention that. But the truth of the matter is there are 5 reasons why I am encouraged, okay? So since Israel was established in 1948, of course, we were not a very popular country in the area. For the first 30 years or so, nobody wanted us. It was all summed up in the so-called 3 no's of Khartoum, when the Arab countries got together after the 6-Day War, and they said, no recognition of Israel, no negotiations with Israel, no peace with Israel. Okay, the 3 no's. But today's reality in the Middle East is extremely different. And I have felt for some time that the Israeli-Arab conflict is over. The Israeli-Palestinian is at boiling point and needs to be addressed. I think it's a cute thing, but the existential threat from fighting that many countries has dissipated. And now that Lebanon has been liberated from the Hezbollah tyranny, I think it looks even better. And Syria, who knows? We all read that the new president is thinking about joining the Abraham Accords and establishing relations with Israel. So we have that situation. And what I think makes me most optimistic is how robust all these new peace agreements and all these new diplomatic relations from the Abraham Accords emerge. Now, one of the most important events that happened after October 7th, which got practically no press anywhere outside of a little article in Israel, was on the 21st of October, literally 2 weeks after the horrible massacre. The Arab countries convened sort of an Arab League in Cairo. And the more radical regimes demanded at that time from all Arab countries to close ranks and to sever their ties with Israel and not let them fly in the airspace and go back to the 3 no's of Khartoum. And today, the majority of Muslim Arabs, live in countries with diplomatic relations with Israel, and those countries said no. They issued a very symbolic call for Israel to show restraint, but there was no joint communique and absolutely nothing operational afterwards. In other words, even though over the last year and a half, Al Jazeera has relentlessly posted very, very disturbing pictures, some of them precise, the governments of the Middle Eastern countries who have relations with Israel have decided that, on the whole, maintaining those relations is more important than assuaging the radical streak that they face. And I think that's a huge something that we need to leverage, something the Palestinians need to see how we leverage that. And we have not done that, but we could. And I think that the dynamic that's being created today, literally today, with the president's visit to the Middle East is going to be part of it. So that's one of the first things that I am optimistic about. Now, the second thing I'm optimistic about is that progress in the Middle East historically has happened when there is a bully who sort of terrorizes all the Arab countries, and they all sort of cower and do what they say. And then once that bully is removed, there's some space for some positive energy. I'm thinking about Saddam Hussein, the students here. This was a horrible Iraqi dictator, bloodthirsty, used gas warfare to kill his own people sometimes. And when he got a little bit too big for his britches and decided he was going to occupy Kuwait, George Bush, the father, created the Coalition of the Willing and unceremoniously took him off the stage. And when that happened, his Secretary of State, James Baker, created a peace process. First, that people convened in Madrid, and that created the opportunity for a Oslo Accords, peace with Jordan occurred. We took a shot with peace with the Palestinians, hasn't gone so well. But it only happened because Saddam Hussein, who was calling the shots and setting the tone, was no longer there. Now, what's happened in the last year and a half is that it wasn't so much Saddam Hussein, but maybe it was the Ayatollah Khamenei who was calling the shots through his proxies, okay? And, one very, very clever woman in the Mossad undid billions of dollars of investment of Iran in the Hezbollah organization with the Beeper attack. And then we saw maybe almost a divine intervention, what happened, the collapse of a very, very evil and despotic government in Syria. I've already mentioned the fact that Hamas, there's practically nobody left from their leadership. And all of a sudden, we have an opportunity for some new dynamics. And that's extremely, extremely important. And not only am I noticing that the winds have changed the Middle East, the players in the Middle East feel that way as well. So let's remember that when they look at Iran now, it's not just that Iran is weak militarily, it's economically on the ropes. Just a couple numbers, because maybe there's an economist or somebody studying economics in there. So in 2022, the inflation rate in Iran was 40%, okay? But certain things like bread and pasta, the price went up 300%, because that's an average. 2023, 44%. 2024, 35%, a total of 172% in 3 years, okay? The rial, the Iranian currency, has dropped in terms of its value from 32,000 per dollar in 2015 to 930,000 per dollar in early 2025. 200,000 Iranians left this year. It's sort of a brain drain they talk about. So when all of a sudden there's negotiations and it seems like Iran is making concessions that we couldn't imagine, it isn't because they sort of had a theological shift. They realize that their economy is collapsing, their government is extremely unstable, and they also realize that they are much more vulnerable to Israeli attack, and maybe they can get away from that. So once the Iranian presence is moved, we see how things are changing. And that's why Ahmed al-Shara, the new president of Syria, looks like he's going to make peace with Israel. And that would be a complete change and something welcome for all of us. At least that's what the Israeli pundits are predicting from the leaks they have received over there. So this is good news in terms of why I'm hopeful for the region, because there's a new dynamic. The third reason why I'm hopeful is because as a person from a centrist party, I talk to people on the right and the left, and it seems like we can all get our arms around the notion of a demilitarized Palestinian state. Right wings don't like calling it state, they would call it autonomy. But when I talk to friends of mine who are in parties much far to the right of me, and I say, do you really want to rule the Palestinians? They say, absolutely not. We don't want to occupy anybody. Would you be willing for them to have full autonomy except to have an army? Well, that's fine, because that's not a state. So we're talking about a semantics, because we have experience in the world with demilitarized states. In 1945, for 10 years, Germany was a demilitarized state. And Japan, from 1945 to 1952, was demilitarized. And then the Treaty of San Francisco gave it another 10 years. And you know what? It was pretty good for those countries' economy, that they didn't have to waste all that money on militaries, and they could allow their battered economies and people to come up, and look what a blessing that's been. And so I'm hopeful that the Palestinian people, after suffering what is clearly the greatest single trauma in their collective memory, what's happened in Gaza to their people, will get the message and understand that there's two ways they can go. They can go with the new Middle East and with the wealthier Gulf states and where history has taken them, or they can still cling to a radical Islamic perspective. And I think they're going to do the right thing when they're given the right choice. And the sign of it is the fact that you can see how Abu Mazen, Abbas they call him in these countries, the President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority is almost sycophantically, like everybody else, trying to play up to President Trump and get an audience and work things out. The fourth reason why I am encouraged and why I think we can have it is that I think that the war in Gaza was a watershed date as well for Israeli Arab citizens, okay? After Israel was attacked, it was a very, very traumatic event for them as well. And our polls tell us that only 10% of Israeli Arabs had any kind of solidarity with Hamas. 70% completely supported Israeli war efforts. These are Israeli Muslim citizens, okay? That level of, and for the Bedouins who had really took a terrible hit from the Hamas, it was transformative in terms of their recognition, or maybe they recalled that they kind of like living in a democracy and kind of like living in a country where there's this kind of freedom and economic prosperity. You know, one exciting thing happened about 3 weeks ago was for the first time ever, 340 Syrian Druze came over from Syria and went to the holiest site for the Druze people, and they set out a camp for them. So I have a close friend who's Druze. We were in the Knesset together for my party. I said, "What was it like? You know, you hadn't seen these people in 75 years." He said it was so moving you can't imagine. And I said, "What was it like for them?" He said they couldn't get over the fact of how rich we were. They earned $300 a month on the average, okay, and we, some of us make $300 a day. A lot of them Druze do. And so he's feeling like that's a whole new way. So the fact the Israeli Arab minority has been maybe a proof that peace offers a better way forward is maybe a signal to their Palestinian cousins that this historic rejection of Israel is not warranted. And the fifth reason why I am optimistic is, quite frankly, and now I put on my hat as environmentalist, we do not have the luxury of continuing with this testosterone-driven belligerence and this religious fanaticism and deep impulse for vengeance. We can't do that because our environment is imploding. The Middle East is a climate hotspot. What does that mean? That means that if the world's temperature has gone up over a degree, we're over 2 degrees, okay? In a city like Cairo or Baghdad, having an air conditioner in the summer is the difference between life and death. And it was seen 2 summers ago when there was a power outage in a building and these poor elderly people couldn't go down the steps and they literally cooked as the temperature went from 50 degrees, which is like 130 to 140, 150, and they all died, okay? Last summer, it was September, October, 1,200 people came to the Hajj in Saudi Arabia, the pilgrimage. Their highest aspiration as a Muslim to go and can be at the site of Islam's birth. And they died on the road of heat prostration. Because why? Because many of them hadn't. I asked a Jordanian friend, what happened there? Because 300 of them were Jordanian. He said, well, Saudi Arabia is very, very tough and doesn't give out that many visas. They didn't have visas. They couldn't get in hotels. They just assumed it'll be okay. We'll just sleep on the road. But it's not okay. Because when the temperature climbs up to 130, 140 degrees, you die, okay? So this is something we have to think about. And the implications are everywhere. I know we talk a lot about the fires in Los Angeles. We're all shocked. But, Israel, which has miraculously, you mentioned, Ellie, that I've been involved with the JNF, which is the National Foresting Agency. So Israel has restored so much of our vegetation. But, up until now, 15% of the trees in Israel burned down over the years 2017 to 2021. And then on our Holocaust Memorial Day, we had the biggest fire in Israel's history, 10,000 dunams. And then on our Memorial Day, just 3 or 4 weeks later, we had twice the size, 20,000 dunam, taking away, for example, the Park Canada, if you know it, wiping it out. I go jogging there. It's near my house. So we have an existential threat. And the two things that happen when you're at war is you, A, don't have the resources to fight climate change. Let me give you an example. We had a hearing in the Knesset. I'm actually helping the chair out there. What can we do to prevent fires? Well, we have certain what you call targets for the Israeli firefighters. Okay, when you have 3,100 firemen in Israel today, we have 2,100. We don't have physically enough people because they're all being drafted to the army to the extent we're there. We need 1,000 more fire trucks, and we need 4 Black Hawk helicopters, which are specially designed so they can drop water on the forests. Okay, now we bought a lot of helicopters in the last year, but none of them are going to fires because we have to going to kill people instead of to fight. That needs to change. And the second thing that happens when we're at war is it totally shuts down the transboundary environmental cooperation, which is going to be so critical as we look beyond the borders. I mean, what do we need to do to get ourselves to a net zero emissions economy? We need to go 100% solar and wind, but it's hard to do that when you're an energy island. So one of the things I'm trying to do as a researcher is figure out with partners, what would it be to have a regional network of electricity? So we could be like Denmark, it's already 80% renewables because they can rely on the hydropower coming from Sweden if they have a day without wind, okay? So those are the things we have to think about, and we can't do it when we're at war. And I think that the more that climate becomes a significant, traumatic event in people's life, I think that the moderates will start to step up and say, okay, enough. We're not going to let radicals whose whole goal is to sabotage any cooperation in the region, let them rule it. So, what's it going to take for these things to happen? There's a saying, it may be apocryphal, that David Ben-Gurion used to say, to be a realist in Israel, you have to believe in miracles. But then I looked it up and I asked ChatGPT and they said, well, I'm not really sure he said that. I don't think he said that. Because I think what he said was what I believe, which is the heart of the Zionist impulse, it's a concept from the Talmud, which said, Lo somchim el hanes. We do not rely on miracles. That's the whole point. That's why Israel was created. People relied on miracles, ended up in the ovens of Auschwitz. So I would much rather, we looked forward, we go to the book of Deuteronomy, and of course it says there, God says, I set before you life and death, a curse and a blessing and a curse. Therefore, choose life that you and your descendants may live, and God willing, the elections will come soon, and the Israeli public will choose life. Thank you very much.
Wow. Well, personally, I would say that I don't buy everything that you said, and I would have my own opinions on that. But thank you so much, Alon, for number one, staying within the framework of 35 minutes. And wow, one needs to digest all that you had said. So we do have time for Q&A. And how should I say? There are some people who did send us some questions. So maybe I'll do justice with them. And we got 10 questions, and I want to summarize it and encapsulate it into 2 or 3. So first issue that came out is, how viable is the two-state solution? You alluded to that indirectly so, but can you say a few words whether this is still there?
Well, there's no question that the October 7th was the worst day in Jewish history since the Holocaust, but it was also the worst day for Palestinian national aspirations because Israelis realized that when over the years they haven't taken the Palestinian declarations in Arabic, usually never in English, that they want to destroy the state of Israel, when they said those words, they needed to take them seriously. In fact, it's probably a little bit, what can I say, condescending not to take them seriously. We take them at their word. And so Israelis today are going to need a lot more assurances they needed 3 years ago to make territorial concessions. That said, Israelis also realize that we have to find a way so that our children don't find themselves with the crushing destiny of living by their swords for the rest of their lives. So I do think that a government that comes in good faith and with international support and the kind of ideas that are coming on the table, and the Arab countries are saying, let us go into Gaza. Let us help you do this. I don't think it's going to become the next Atlantic City with Trump Towers. That's not a vision which I think is going to happen. But for the first time, we're hearing the wealthy Arab countries starting to take ownership and responsibility for a problem of the Arab world. And so I think that whether we call it a two-state solution or a expanded autonomy authority. I think there's a real way to move forward. When we were in the power, our party, the Minister of Defense was Benny Gantz, the head of my party, and he did a lot of very, very small but important things to improve the quality of life for Palestinians and give them a sense of horizon. So I think making baby steps forward and finding ways to give Palestinians the space, the stability, the economic opportunities that they need to move forward, I think we can make a step forward. I don't think that in the long term, having a one-state solution with a country which is about 50% Arab is going to be something which is going to be lasting. I'm supposed to talk about sustainable. I don't think that's sustainable. Look at Lebanon if you want a proof in point. So I still think that a two-state solution in the long term is the only way. It's just going to take a little bit longer to get there after October 7th.
Thanks, Alon. I have my own now. One of mine, one from the audience, one of mine. One landscape that you didn't allude to, didn't you refer to, is the internal Israeli scene and what is happening on the political level between the various conflicting powers. You mentioned fundamentalist fanaticism on the Palestinian side. But there is some shift that has occurred in the last 2 years within the Israeli political scene. So how does this all fit into your... I'm playing a little bit of a devil's advocate here.
I think we can look at the polls to indicate big shifts that have taken place. And what's clear is that the Israeli right and the Israeli religious community is looking for an alternative to their historic support for the Likud government. And we see this in the, I would say, meteoric rise of a new proposed party by Naftali Bennett. Now, what kind of a party is that going to be? When Naftali Bennett, he just had a angioplasty in his heart, but thank God he's okay, whatever. So I sent him a WhatsApp because I got to know him. He was our prime minister. And he's an interesting guy, Naftali Bennett, because, his parents are from Berkeley. He started off as a real liberal kind of 60s kind of guy. And so his native tongue is English. So he always prefers to go back, lapse into English when you go talk to him. Anyway, so I sent him well wishes that he needs to be healthy and, take care of himself. And he wrote me back a long WhatsApp about how important it is that as we look forward, that all of us who share 90% of our goals learn to moderate our position so we can find a way to be together. In other words, the mantra of the government that he led is something which he is there. And what's interesting is that he's bringing many more people from the right to understand that that's what ultimately we need. And I also felt very, very much when I was in the Knesset that the divisiveness of Israeli politics has largely served to support the radical politicians. And you'll excuse me, but I'm in the opposition. I feel very happy to criticize the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, brilliant in creating enmity and a sense of polarization and hatred between the different parties. But it's not like that. And vast majority of Israelis want to have good education and want a good health system and want to have, a good, safe neighborhood and a clean environment. And that's what we need to work on together. And I think that in the next election, there's going to be a move that's going to go away from, we have a government now with 61 seats. We had 159. That's not going to work anymore. We need a broad that allows everybody to come in, including the Arabs, who are willing to accept Israel as a Jewish and democratic state.
In Hebrew, they say, "Me'apeh shelcha le'Elohim." May the Almighty hear what you're saying and let this be fulfilled. As I said, there are different viewpoints on this, but if I may still push you to the wall a little bit. Fundamentalist trends in Israel, I mean, your wishful thinking are respected. But, I mean, we see clearly what's happening. We see the polls. I mean, so how can you ignore this? And how can you be,
Okay, so let's define what's a fanatic, okay? I was sitting with Tzvika Fogel, who is the chair of the Israeli Internal Security Committee of the Knesset this week. And 4 days ago, I went from his office to the airport to fly over here. And he's chairing the hearings on fire prevention. And he is an interesting guy. He was a general in the army, and he is in the Itamar Ben-Gvir's Jewish Power Party. So there's no reason why I should have anything in common with him when I sat down. And first we started talking about grandchildren. I became a grandfather this summer. Nice.
Thank
Thank you. It does give you as an environmentalist this, very vague notion of future generations. I've been saying it for years, but now like I'm holding these babies and I say, my gosh, they're going to make it to the 22nd century. Holy smokes. It takes a new meaning. Anyway, and he said, you know what, Alon, if you won't mind, I would like you to be our scientific advisor. I know you're from an opposite party, but we're thinking about our grandkids here and giving them a country that we want to live in. And I think so that is ultimately going to be the thing. Now, there are, I think, small pockets of very toxic extremism. Particularly, we see a few elements in the West Bank who are, I think, causing enormous damage to Israel's image and to our moral integrity. And and it's not a surprise that the Minister of Police is turned a blind eye to many of these violations. I think that once the government changes, and it's going to happen sooner or later, I hope somebody will ask me a question about what's happening with the government and the new elections, because there's every day something new. And when that happens, I think that there will be a return to normalcy, and people who embrace lawlessness and for no reason at all terrorize Palestinian communities, they will pay the price and go to jail. Yeah, Scott.
Scott,
So I love sustainable casting.
raise your voice.
Are there technological advancements in Israel that can foster peace in the region and throughout the world?
Well, that's a fat pitch. I've been teaching the last 3 years. I've been parceling out sabbatical time and teaching at the Stanford Business School a course on climate innovation and public policy. And one of the things we do is we have students break into groups of 4, and then they have to serve as sort of McKinsey-style consultants to climate tech firms. And I always make sure that about half of them are Israeli. That's sort of my subtle introduction to Israel, not so subtle maybe. And it's unbelievable what's coming out. So if you think about the climate challenge, even though it hasn't been prioritized by the Israeli Innovation Authority, which helps startups, we are more into cyber security and to biotech, but there's some amazing things that are doing. For example, in the fire department, there's a thing called Fire Dome, which takes the concept of the Iron Dome and uses the same technology, but instead of sending little missiles against bombs, it goes after fires that come, embers that come in there and takes them out and can sense. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. It's been done on a pilot level, but it could revolutionize early response to forest fires, which is something we need all over the world. Last year in Canada, they lost an area 4 times the size of Israel in fires. It's happening everywhere. In terms of, we all know that we have a problem that, I'm sorry, I don't want to hit the caterers here, but beef is not very good for our planet, okay? Getting beef substitutes is 98% less water, 98% land, 90% less emissions. And there's a company called Olive Farms, which allows us to have cultured meat, and it doesn't actually, it hops over the Impossible Burger stage, which is a plant-based thing, and it has steaks, real steaks, okay? Now, it's very expensive still, but these are the kind of innovations we need. Certainly in the water area, in terms of relations, we had a meeting just now, and this is a good chance to give a shout out to the wonderful work done by Ellie and the people doing this water forum. This year, for the first time, we brought in African partners. And I was sitting and talking with a group from there, and 2 of them had been to Israel learning about water technologies. And I said, how is it that in Africa, only less than 1% uses drip irrigation, and yet we can't produce enough food for your continent? This is crazy. And so I think certainly in that area, 703 million people, they told us, are without fresh water. And yet you can produce 1,000 quarts of water for 50 cents. That's what Israeli technology has done in desalination. So there's a lot of things that we could be doing. And I think that one of the things for me that shifted when I was chair of this parliamentary committee overseeing climate is I brought in all of these climate tech companies to talk about, how you guys doing? And although the products were completely different, the melodies that they sang were all the same. And it is, we are suffocating. We are not getting the kind of support we need to move our products forward and save the planet. So that's certainly something which we could all do. And there's people at Northwestern who are doing very interesting work. And I think that the kind of collaboration that can and will be sustained here, it'd be something very valuable. So yes, 50% of the emissions that we need to reduce to get to net zero will come from technologies which have not yet been invented. That's the UN talking, okay? So we need to think about this much more seriously. And a Luddite anti-technological bias by environmentalists is not the solution.
Yes, sir. Maybe you
said
introduce yourself so that we know who you
Ray
are.
Black from Northwestern, Kellogg, and the law school. You said something that I strongly agree with, that very little attention is being paid to, which is the quiet from the Arabs in Israel. How do we export that to the West Bank, to Gaza, right? The Arabs in Israel are saying, no, we may not be entirely happy with the Jews. We're discriminated against, but we're not going to go out slaughtering them either. And what we see outside is worse. How do we export that?
I think that this was
Can
a
I say,
process.
can I say a word before?
Yes, we have an expert on Israeli Arabs.
It so happens that I'm just completing a new article on the response of the Arabs in Israel to the war. And what we get is, based on surveys and polls and reading the research material, is it is a multifaceted response. So the attempt, not only by, not that it's an attempt, by Sami Smocha and others to envisage a situation where the process of Israelization has been enhanced to a degree that, oh, look at us, follow us, is not precisely reflecting the reality. There are other sides to it, but this is a side comment, and I would like...
But all Israeli Arab political parties condemned October 7th, which is very important for all of us, And I think that when I think about it, I have many Israeli Arab friends, and every so often, over a glass of beer, or if they're a little more serious about their Islam, then maybe it's a cup of tea, I say, let's say there was a Palestinian state. Would you want to move there? And they're like, with all due respect, and with Palestinian identity, everything like that, but I'm at best loyal to my village, and living in Israel is pretty good. And there is an Israelization phenomenon where the winners of cooking competitions, the Master Chef competition for 3 years in a row was an Arab woman, different Arab women, but it was a reflection that they're, I'll give you an example of this because I'm from academia and we're here at a university. When I was chair of the Department of Public Policy at Tel Aviv University, I had a affirmative action initiative. It was not in compliance with the university, which has a colorblind position, no DEI at Tel Aviv, but I said no. There are 3 groups that I think they won't be nuclear physicists probably, but they could be good civil servants and learn public policy, and that was Ethiopians, that was ultra-Orthodox, and Arabs, okay? And at some point, I realized that the Arabs don't need it so much. If you go to the Technion, in 1950, and this is a fact that I can give you the footnote for, Professor. In 1950, they did a survey about literacy, and 2% of Israeli Arab women could read, okay? Because most of the intelligentsia had left during the 1948 war, and it was really the falachim, the peasants who remained, okay? Go to the Technion today and see what's going on at the architecture faculty there. 30% are Arab women, okay? It's unbelievable. So there is, and often they refer to them, you talk to them, we're kind of like the Jews in America. We feel like if there's equal rights, we have to be a little bit smart, a little more ambitious, okay? Look what's happening to their birth rate, okay? That's the best indication, okay? In 1965, the average Arab Muslim woman had 8.5 children. It was the highest in the world at the time, okay? Today, they're below 3. They're less than Jewish women, okay? That's a sign that because of women who are empowered, they have helped their community see the benefits of being part of a Western democracy. So I think that's what's happening. I mentioned that I'm an optimist, and Ellie probably has much more nuanced and correct, but what about those groups, whatever. But I think on the whole, if you take the trend where we were 30 years ago and today, it's a good one, except for the crime, but that's a whole nother lecture.
We can continue the discussion when you come next fall to be with us here. Okay. Yes, Stephen. But raise your voice, or there is a mic coming to you.
Follow up on your question, just for a moment. At Tel Aviv University, what percentage of your student population is Arab or Palestinian?
So Palestinian, practically none. It's very hard to get a visa, and
Right.
they don't know Hebrew. And I don't have a precise, I could tell you what we had in our department, which I said we have to have at least 10%, which is only 50% of their things. But you hear Arabic everywhere on campus. So I would say, I can tell you in terms of how much are in the lower socioeconomic thing, but for sure, you're seeing geographically more than you'd expect, because Arabs don't live that much around
No,
Tel Aviv.
I get it. My question was going to be, post October 7th, were there any issues with those students on campus?
There have been issues where for example, Palestinians have Land Day, okay, which is the day when they commemorate the fact that there was a lot of nationalization and many of their lands were taken away. And right-wing students felt that was inappropriate during a war, disloyal, but it was not a riot. It was not, nobody got hurt, you know. A lot of politicians on the right condemned Tel Aviv University. And we said, you know, we are a haven for freedom of expression. And as long as people are not violent, they can speak their minds and they don't, you know, preach against the state. And so I think that I myself haven't seen any outward manifestation of hostility.
So the reason I'm asking the question is I'm with Hebrew University, and Technion is represented right over there. We're up to 18.
Some of my best friends. It's okay.
We're up to 18. At Hebrew U, we have 18% Arab population, right? We only had really one significant incident, and it was from a professor.
Correct.
Who is no longer with the university, right? And not because of the university, the Israeli government took care of that. And quite frankly, they can't in their own, if they came from the West Bank, they cannot discuss how good Israel and being at the university is, because that would actually probably endanger their life. And so you're not going to ever hear anybody from Gaza, because we also have a farm in the Gaza envelope. And we can't get Gazan workers, primarily because they won't come back twice alive.
I got no argument with you, Say, so I'm not going to.
So I don't know how you do that. I don't know.
Okay, I want to add one statistics. The Technion, which you mentioned, and I welcome you. It's okay, even though my affiliation is with Tel Aviv University. Technion has 21% of the students are Arabs. Tel Aviv University, I would assume that the percentage is between 14 and 15%.
Yes, they are.
What? Dvorah, I want to.
Yeah.
Dvorah,
I was going to say for Tel Aviv Law School, where I've taught, I'd say 10 to 20%, just simply by looking at how many women have headscarves.
If you go to the Faculty of Law in Tel Aviv, the most spoken language is Arabic. There are serious questions about freedom of speech following the Gaza War, which I will not go into, where some of our leaders are concerned. Dvorah, you want to say something?
I just wanted to say that the president of Tel Aviv University was here earlier this year. And so some of the statistics, Arabs are concentrated, Israeli Arabs are concentrated in certain schools. In public health, they're a huge group, over 20% in Tel Aviv. And you know, it's easy to see. But also, the president of Tel Aviv University has taken a leadership position to protect the Arab students at Tel Aviv University. He's gone to the Knesset to fight because they would try to make the display of the Palestinian flag a crime in universities. And it has never been prohibited to display a Palestinian flag. So the president of Tel Aviv University fought for that, fought to get them the right to demonstrate as long as it was not violent. So there was a lot of protection of Israeli students, Arab Israeli students after the war. So very impressive.
Thank you, Dvorah. If I may shift the I was going to yeah. So maybe, yes, ma'am, you were...
My question, actually, war is never good for the environment. So I was wondering about what the environmental impacts have been since October 7th in Gaza and Israel.
So first of all, I wrote an article about this 8 or 9 months ago, which I'm happy to send to you, along with the outgoing Director General of the Ministry of Environment. Horrible. Of course it's horrible. I mean, asbestos. I mean, the water infrastructure very seriously damaged, even though Israel piped in additional waters. Certainly munitions, which are left out, you know, they can't, in Los Angeles, at the Pacific Palisades, they can't rebuild the houses because they're afraid. That's nothing compared to when you're trying to rebuild around an area where there's bombs that haven't gone off. So the Gazans, who already had an environmental crisis in 1967 because the Egyptians had overpumped their wells. And ever since the Palestinians have overseen the Gaza Strip, the water contamination has become unbearable. So there's basically no groundwater that's fit to drink left. We need to have a environmental Marshall Plan for Gaza, and that involves a serious desalination plant, and there's a lot of ideas coming up about that. We're going to have to do a lot of ground soil decontamination. So yeah, it's something which war is. It's not only to go to Ukraine. You got the same things. It's just a horrible situation.
Carol?
To piggyback on that a little bit, so what's the reality for getting actual environmental sustainability back on the agenda as soon as if the conflict? I guess it's twofold. First,
Can you hear?
Are they still continuing to make developments in the environmental space now, and as they learn about things and try to uncover things that will help the country? And second,
Within Israel.
Currently, I mean, I know things are, there's a lot of technologists and researchers who are fighting the war, so it's not possible for them. And then second, let's say that there is a plan in place. How soon do you think it is before it ramps up, where the environment takes center stage because of things like this, because the detrimental conditions that they're going to find post-war?
So you're asking an opposition politician whose ticket is the environment to assess the government's performance in the environment. So you're not going to get an unbiased response. But this government has been the worst environmental government that we have ever seen. I'll give you just one example. Their coalition agreement said that Israel should have a climate law because all these countries have climate laws. Everybody does. And yet, after 2 years of hearings, and I want to throw out a word, Yaakov Asher is a member of the Knesset from the ultra-Orthodox the Torah Judaism Party. He's the chair of the Interior Committee. He worked so hard to get that law passed. He couldn't do it because the Ministry of Finance wasn't willing to agree that there would be even 27% renewable electricity. I mean, there's over 50%. You go to a country like Spain or whatever. So this government, the Minister of Environment is a woman who is a political opportunist. We were once quite friendly, but I'm very disappointed in the way she has run the Ministry of Environment. But my answer to that is we have to look at the local governments, because until we bring in a new central government, there's a lot of things that communities can do for recycling, for climate resilience and adaptation. And these are the kind of things which mayors don't often have enough money to do, but we can help them to do that. So that's my response. In the last 2 years, at the national level, we've seen nothing but retreat, but that doesn't mean that all is lost.
Professor Hirano?
Thank you so much for this opportunity. This is Conrad Hirano from Northwestern History Department. I specialize in the history of anti-pollution movements in modern Japan. I'd like to ask additional question about environmental effects of this Gaza War. But from the historical perspective, do you consider this war to be less environmentally polluting or more environmentally destructive because of modern technologies used for the warfare? Like from the historical perspective, how do you see this war's environmental impacts on both sides of the political boundary?
Okay, so because this war was so protracted and long, the damage has been extraordinary. I'll just talk about sewage treatment. Ironically, in 2022, regional environmental activists were thrilled that a new sewage treatment plant was built in the Gaza Strip. They'd never had good sewage. I did 20 years of reserve duty there, and the smell told you what was going on. And they made a really good, and they said, why is this good? From Israel's perspective, because several times we get all of our water from desalination plants. The first and one of the largest is in Ashkelon. And several times during the year, Ashkelon is about 15, 20 kilometers from Gaza. The sewage from Gaza would be so highly concentrated that even the reverse osmosis membranes couldn't handle it. They had to close down the plant, okay? But then we had the new sewage treatment facility, and we can, move forward because we share the same coastline, want it or not. If you want to go swimming in Tel Aviv and they have fecal coliform being released in Gaza, it's going to get you, okay? And after the war, that plant sustained enormous damage because, once again, Hamas, very cynical and cruel organization, embed itself in these kind of things. And so things get harmed. But I'm not sure that this was qualitatively different. I'm saying quantitative because it was just so long and so many battles took place in such a concentrated area. So it has been better. And if you think about the number of, if you're talking about emissions, I have a doctoral student who's looking at what he calls it the carbon bootprint. How much do militaries? And we're going to try to quantify what the war meant in terms of the delta between a peacetime war and a war, the army, because clearly when you're flying sorties and using tanks, they're just burning up fuel like crazy, and that's very bad for our atmosphere. So I don't have a precise, because the analysis hasn't been done, but it's going to be serious. It's going to be a lot.
I think our time is over. And
she's been whining for the whole time. Let's
oh, yes? Well, you're the boss.
Yeah, okay.
Two very short and simple questions. Where are you from? You have no Israeli accent.
I was raised in North Carolina. I went to Israel when I was 17. So I'm an Israeli by choice. And if you go to Israel, there's just too many Yankees there. If you hang out with any Americans, they just completely destroy your accent.
And secondly, I was wondering if arson was ever considered as the cause of the fires, Israeli independence.
Okay.
The timing of it seems so.
So I've been involved in Israeli forestry policy for a long time, and it's something we don't publicize because we don't want to encourage it. But well over 50% of the forest fires in Israel are traced to nationally motivated arson activities. People who are dissatisfied with Israel, usually Arabs, express their dissatisfaction by torching trees. And it's been that way since the 1920s and 30s. There's nothing new about it, okay? And so in the present case, we don't have a smoking gun. There's people said, oh, they arrested a bunch of people and they don't have any. But historically, we know that arson is a serious issue. And it's a complicated, I wrote a whole book about Israeli forestry, so I go into it there. But basically, for a lot of Arabs who don't feel integrated, they don't see connected to the space. But I want to tell you that the Israeli forests are a refuge to all of its citizens. And I've done surveys to show that Israeli Arabs, percentage-wise, use the forest more than anybody because their cities don't really have parks. So the JNF forests are free, are well-managed. They clean up on the Sundays for the mess. And so... and I've always, in fact, I went around when I was to mayors and saying, you have to speak out against it because they're destroying your forests. It's your recreational facilities. But yes, arson, it's inconvenient truth is a part of our fire pathology. I want to thank everybody for coming out.
Wait. We haven't finished yet.
Okay.
Come.
You can thank everybody for coming out.
Alon, to be a chairperson, it's difficult because you need to summarize the session. And what do you say, particularly when your opinions differ from the speakers? And I was preoccupied all the session. What am I going to say? So I have one word, other than thank you, of course, etc. You are inspirational.
Oh, thank you.
And I thank you for that.
Come back and vote for us.
And you're going to come back. We do have plans, as Alon indicated, to do some collaborative work on water and other issues in the coming year. And now that you have spoken and you have been so enthusiastic about what you talk about, so engaged, your English is really good.
I had a very good teacher in high school.
Says the guy with the heavy Israeli accent. You didn't ask me that question, ma'am. So, thank you so much, and let's thank our speaker. There is